like to dedicate our learning to anyone who's in need of healing right now. It's a tense time, and I'm going to open with our first source. Let's see if this works. I'm going to share my screen for just a bit. We're not going to spend too much time on the shared screen, I don't think. Can everyone see that? Because you were Gerim in Egypt? Okay. Ooh, that's not working. There we go. That's not the first source. Okay. Wonderful. The first source on the source sheet for anyone who can see, it's a quote by Heschel. Can anyone read that? Can someone jump in and read that quote for us?
I'll be glad to.
Thank you, Shira.
Okay. How dare we come before God with our prayers when we commit atrocities against the one image we have of the divine, human beings? Rabbi Abraham.
Okay. How dare we come before God with our prayers when we commit atrocities against the one image we have of the divine, human beings? And I think this sort of sets the stage for where we're at right now, right? A lot of us are throwing our prayers towards God at a time of modern plague, unsure of where we're headed and what our fates are, reaching out to God. And Heschel's reminding us that there's more than one avenue to God's salvation. There's prayer, but there's also the good deeds that we can do with one another. And in mentioning the coronavirus right now, I want to sort of acknowledge it and also put it aside for a little bit. For this next chunk of time that we're going to be learning text, I'd like us to step into the world of the Beit Midrash of years ago, of either the ancient rabbis, the modern rabbis, the yeshivas, seminaries, Hillel houses, anywhere where you've been studying Torah before, the HI, small social hall, and put yourself into these texts that we're going to learn together. Rabbi Heschel is teaching us to think about the other people who are in our lives and how we treat the other people in our worlds. And that's what I want to do tonight by exploring this topic of because you were Gerim in the land of Egypt. I want to welcome everyone who's been joining. I'm going to repeat my invitation, which a few of you have taken me up on, to unmute yourselves throughout this entire session. Maybe everyone's in a very loud space, which is okay, because it's going to be as participatory as possible. We have 4 sources here. The Bible 4 times tells us this one same sentence, Ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. And we have it 4 different ways. Let's read these 4 times together. We're gonna, again, I would love to do this as chavruta. I apologize that my breakout rooms aren't working right now. And I want to read these together and have people start thinking about the different ways that this phrase is used. Ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Right now we're using the translation that is on Sefaria.org, which I believe is the JPS translation. I'm not wedded to that translation, and I'm curious to see if we have better translations for this. So, Leah, would you read the Exodus 22:20 for us, if you're able to?
Sure. You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt.
Okay. You want to read it again for us?
Sure. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Great. Who's going to do Exodus 23:9 for us?
I'll do it.
Great. Thank you, Rena.
You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt.
And can you do it one more time?
You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt.
Okay. So we've got some repetition there, which is a little interesting when you hear it a couple times. Let's see, who's up next? Stephen, can I get you to read the next one, Leviticus 19:34?
Yes, here we go.
Yeah.
The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens, shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I, the Lord, am your God.
And one more time for us, Stephen.
Stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I, the Lord, am your God.
Thank you. And Greg, can you do Deuteronomy 10?
Sure can. I was actually trying to press spacebar, but it didn't work. Apologies.
That's okay.
You too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Okay, let's hear it one more time.
You too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Okay, 4 instances of Ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. You would imagine either Ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, would be used for a wide range of things, all sorts of things, or it's one very simple message. But it's used 4 times in the Torah, 4 different ways in 4 different places. The order that I've put them here is the order that they appear in Tanakh. What do you notice? Let's hear some observations of either similarities, differences, questions about the language. What do you see here in the texts?
I think it's fairly interesting. The first 2 are the negative things you shouldn't do to a stranger, and the second 2 are actually a positive, positive engagements that you should have with the stranger. So I think it's quite a flip from the first 2 to the second 2.
Yeah, what's the positive exactly that we're being exhorted to do?
Well, in the third one, it's really quite embracing. You should consider that person as a citizen, and Vahavta lo kamocha, love him as yourself. And the fourth was a little bit more neutral, to befriend the stranger.
Yeah, and if you look at the Hebrew, again, this is where the translations can sometimes throw us off. The same word is used in both, ve'ahavta and ve'ahavtem. So, yeah, who's that?
So I have a question.
Yeah, Dennis.
So what is a stranger?
Okay. And really, what is the ger in the language of the Torah in this context? Well, I gave you all very little context of these sources, but we have some context in the sense that the book of Exodus is following the Exodus from Egypt, which we know about, and Deuteronomy, we're preparing to go into the land of Israel. There's some context here, but you're right. What do people think? What is the ger? Who is the ger they're referring to? What does this word either mean generally, or you think specifically in this context?
Well, you opened up with Heschel. How dare we come before God with our prayers when we commit atrocities against the one image we have of the divine, human beings? Is that not a broad brush? Could that not be all human beings?
Okay. Stephen, on behalf of Heschel, is going to put out the proposal that maybe this is all of humanity. Gerim means anyone who's either not Jewish or maybe just not in your community, any other. Am I characterizing what you said correctly, Stephen?
Yes, I would say what you said first, all humanity.
All humanity. Okay. Any other suggestions? Yeah.
In the Torah, wouldn't ger typically be a non-Israelite?
Okay, and more specifically, non-Israelite would also be every other human on the planet. Were you thinking more specifically within that category?
I mean, yeah, it's just, it's just stranger, a non-Israelite human, yeah.
Well, but I think if you let me jump off of where you're going, that you're saying maybe like who you might encounter, right? The people who you're living around. I think that's probably one of the most literal or traditional readings would be the people who live near you who aren't of your community. David, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about the kind of the context where it says, it talks about the widows and the orphans and the strangers. I'm thinking of the people who don't own property, like the people who weren't assigned property on day one and then moved in, and they have no in an agricultural society, they got nothing.
Okay, so David's making an interesting point. Why are we going through all of this? There are all these rules. It says don't oppress, don't what's the other word? Yeah, tone. Where is it? Wrong, right? Don't wrong, don't oppress. Why are we saying, who is this? Who are we protecting here? If we're just talking about the non-Jewish people out there, they've got their own systems of governments. They have their own hierarchies. They have stronger people, weaker people, more rich people. David's saying clearly this is some sort of vulnerable population. Okay, there's dozens of times that the Bible says not to oppress the stranger, and it says it along with, as David pointed out, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. I brought the 4 times that it says because you were strangers in Egypt. So there's a connection clearly that these gerim that they're referring to are some sort of class that needs protecting. Maybe David suggested that maybe they don't own property, they have fewer resources, they have no one maybe to protect them, no one else to protect them, right? The orphan and the widow, at least in biblical context, wouldn't have had somebody to protect them or to support them.
Thinking in the modern day, most people think of strangers as being a threat.
Hmm.
And the first thing you think about when you meet somebody that you don't know is, are they out to harm me? Certainly in a modern political sense, that's true. But I think where our first instinct is to protect ourselves.
Okay. So in fact, you're saying that then in this case, with that kind of reading, the Bible's suggesting do the exact opposite of your natural inclination. You might view people as threatening, as you being the one who needs protection from them. Whereas what's actually happening is the Torah saying, no, you haven't really understood their story. You might have misinterpreted their story. These are people who might need protecting as well.
Right.
Any other possibilities of what the word ger might mean in the biblical context?
A convert.
A convert. The modern word ger in Hebrew is most typically used to refer to someone who's converting to Judaism, someone who's come from outside the community and adopted the norms and the practices of the community and signed on to become a full member. And what's interesting here would be, well, let me ask you, Greg, what would the implications be if this is referring to a convert, someone who's joining the community?
Well, I'm going to directly read from the Steinsaltz commentary, since he has much better ideas than I do on this. But at the bottom it says,
Please.
A convert has no family, has uprooted himself from his home, and has limited protection in society. I can certainly identify partially with the first two. I have plenty of protection in society, but I think he's onto something in terms of uprooting oneself and sort of identity transfusion, if you will.
Right, and presumably the converts of days of yore, when the protection that someone would be afforded communally would come from the local community, from their local religious community, then you could also understand that last clause of his saying that unprotected as well. Okay, so the converts, right? Even the converts, the ones who have said they're not just your neighbors who are living nearby who are interested in being a part of your general circle. They've actually signed on to become full members of the community. Seemingly, they are not. There's no assumption that they would be protected. There's an extra warning, right? David pointed out earlier that the ger is mentioned alongside the orphan and the widow, but in these 4 verses, they're not mentioned. I can't promise. I am no biblical scholar. Maybe they are mentioned in the verse before or the verse after, but in these verses, they're not mentioned. And Greg's going to look it up for me, which I appreciate. But in these 4 verses, they're not mentioned, and so there's a special category. They might even need more protection, or maybe there's a different reason. Why would we mention the ger specifically? We've given a few different options of what it might refer to. Almost all of them, except for Stephen's Heschel reading, pretty much assumes that they're a vulnerable population that needs protecting. But why single out the ger? What does the ger have to do with anything, as opposed to the handicapped person, the orphan and the widow, who are the typical ones, or anyone else who's more vulnerable? Michelle, I feel like there's something ready to come out. Ready to come out. No? Now you're muting yourself because you really don't want to say anything.
No, I was just, no, I don't have anything just yet, but I'm interested in everything.
Nothing. Okay. Adina, why the Ger? Why is the Ger mentioned, singled out of anyone else?
Me?
Yeah,
Hmm.
you can call a friend if you need help.
No, I think it's a good point because the ger yatom and almanah, like the stranger, the orphan, and the orphan and the widow are never singled out. They're only mentioned in the trio, the orphan and the widow, and the stranger is the one that's singled out. So it's a really good question.
Well, it's obvious that a widow and orphan need to be cared for. Like, it's very clear that they're vulnerable.
Ooh, I like it.
Whereas a ger, like, could be reviled. Like, first of all, you might not know if someone is a ger, but even if you do, like, it's possible that they would get the opposite treatment. Like, people might be suspicious of them, people might be wary of them. So Torah has to go out of its way to tell us not to be like that and to give them special care, just like we would to vulnerable populations like widows and orphans.
Okay, so they would need a prescription to be protected as opposed to other people, other vulnerable populations.
They would need our attention. I think, right? Like that's what Diana's saying. Like it's not obvious. Is that what you meant by prescription?
Yeah.
Right. That's like a fancy term. Okay, fine.
Yeah, Leah, hop in.
Could ger be used as a catch-all? I mean, could you, like, when you're talking about the orphan and the widow and whoever else, could that also fall under ger? So when you're talking about all three, maybe you're saying the ger subcategory also orphans and widows and whoever else falls into that.
Do you feel compelled to that answer? Like, is there something driving you to suggest that, or?
No, but I'm now wondering what might compel me to that answer.
Okay. Well, okay. I invite you to ruminate on that for a couple minutes. I'd love to see, because there's actually, I want to make the argument that there's a very clear textual explanation. But Sam, did you put your camera on because you want to share something?
No, but the sources you showed, it equates a ger to us as strangers in the land of Egypt.
Yes. Yeah, go on, Sam.
I don't know. There's something there, but I don't know what it is.
I also think there's something there. That's why I titled the topic of the talk of this class, because you were Gerim in Egypt. Sam, I think that's the exact answer, is that there has something to do with our historical communal life experience of being whatever a ger means. We were that. We were Gerim. So however we're trying to define that word, at one point
Abraham right through. We were nomadic people. Right.
That's right. But again, it's very explicitly qualified here, right? Ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. So there's something about the Egyptian experience that gave us a ger-like life, a ger-like experience that we can relate to, or maybe we have a hard time relating to, or we have to be reminded to relate to when it comes to interacting with other people who somehow also fall into this category of ger.
Well,
So I think yes.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Stephen.
I would think in the context of the holiday, in the context of the 4 passages that we started out with, the mitzvah is to remember the way we were treated in the land of Egypt. And when you think about slaves, you don't think that slaves are treated very kindly. And more of our recent history and the images that are conjured up about blacks and slavery and how they were treated in the South, or possibly even in the North. The cruelty that befalls slaves who either are not towing the line or are towing the line or are starving. I mean, even more so the slaves of the Holocaust, of which my parents were. So slavery conjures up all of these evil images treatment of people that is inhumane. So in the context of the holiday, in the context of what we're trying to think about, we don't want to treat people as we were once treated. And that's with the brutality, that's with the degradation, etc.
Right. We know oppression and being wronged. We've lived that. Our people have lived that for millennia. Yeah, Dina?
Well, no, Stephen made me think that, like, I know that, like, there was that prophecy, Kigari, right, that God tells Abraham that we will be strangers in Egypt. And then we talk about here in these psukim that you brought that, like, we are, right, referring that we are strangers in Egypt. But I just feel like the whole Pesach Seder, and every time we talk about, like, most of Exodus, we refer to the fact that we were slaves, not that we were strangers. I just wonder, and I know that, like, when it talks in Mishpatim about the laws of us being slaves, it references the fact that we were slaves in Egypt, but a lot of the language is more about us being strangers and slaves. And that could be like a tangential comment for another time, but I never thought of that.
I hadn't thought of that before, but it's an interesting point. And if you think about it, we had couple hundred years of years in Egypt as a people.
Mhm.
And not all of those times were as
Right.
slaves. And we don't think about the time before slavery as being particularly bad. It's
Mhm.
not. I don't think it's taught that way. I don't think, although there might be midrashim that I'm not familiar with, but maybe they weren't that good either. I was actually while Stephen was sharing what he said. I think I could relate. I'd like to, in order to suggest something a little bit radical, I'm going to talk about a different group's oppression for a few minutes that Stephen mentioned. Enslaved Black people in the 1800s and 1700s in this country had a wide range of experiences. Some of those experiences were as horrific as the worst things that any human can endure. And some were probably more along the category of degradation, of lack of human respect, of lack of what we would call today civil rights and human rights, but not necessarily didn't experience violence, but had their rights taken away from them. And I'm not saying that there's the same range of experience. There are no perfect parallels, but maybe it doesn't even have to go to the worst of the experiences, right? I don't think, my suggestion would be that what the Bible's talking about here is not saying don't enslave a group of other people, torture them, kill them, throw their babies into the river, build crematoria and gas chambers. I don't think that this is what that's suggesting. I think that's already assumed beforehand. This is going much further, and I think a lot of what we've been saying for the last couple of minutes, at least, is in reference to the Exodus quotes. And I want us to also remember that we also have Leviticus and Deuteronomy, which bring in Ve'ahavta, which adds a whole other layer to this. Michelle, what do you want to say?
I was just going to say something about that too. It's like we're really being told here about how we should feel. It's not about how you should treat. It's really about how you should feel. You should feel, you should love them. You should recognize that they have a nefesh. I'm noticing that word, like yadatem et nefesh hager. It's translated as, the feelings of the stranger, but I think it's saying something more specifically in the Hebrew about the humanity of the ger, and that you should feel the humanity of the ger.
I love that. And Michelle, I mean, you're a couples therapist, right? So you know the connection between emotions and actions and how important that dynamic is. So I'm curious, Ve'ahavta probably isn't just talking about what internal.
Right.
Internal. It's also probably speaking something about what we're supposed to be doing externally as well.
But it doesn't actually say that, right? I mean, I think the translation of the last one, you must befriend. Befriend implies more than Ve'ahavta.
Well, I think, who was it that, was it Shira?
Yeah.
Yeah, Shira pointed out that Ke'ezrach mikem might actually be, the stranger will be like a citizen of yours, might be one bit of an action associated, explicit actions associated with making them full citizens, not just resident aliens.
Mm-hmm.
I should mention there's a term ger toshav, which is used a few times in the Bible, which is often translated as resident alien, which would be somebody who's living in the land of Israel or in the area controlled by the ancient Israelites, who was granted status to live there, but wasn't required to become Jewish. And we're going to see there's one interesting line from Bamidbar, which we'll look at, from Numbers, that we'll look at in a few minutes, that I think raises some interesting questions there. Was there, yeah, Rena? Yeah.
I was just thinking, I seem to keep going back to the difference between the ger and then the orphan and widow, which to me feels like more of a hierarchical benevolence, like, but this is really coming from a place of empathy. This is a very different experience if you can relate it to something you've actually gone through, as opposed to, I'm going to be kind because I'm just benevolent. This is me.
Right, and theoretically, the widow and the orphan are part of your community. They are under the umbrella of protection of the Jewish community, whereas the ger might not be. But we have this relationship. We haven't all been orphaned. We haven't all experienced what it means to be to lose a partner. But collectively, somehow, we have all had this experience of being Gerim in Mitzrayim. I'd love to. I'm curious if anyone else wants to tease apart a little bit more what exactly that is referring to. Meaning, what about the experience of Egypt? Is it as Stephen was suggesting, the oppression of the Pharaoh? Is that what is that the inspiration? It's saying you've experienced the worst that the world has to offer. You know how bad it can feel. You have no idea what the experience of this ger in front of you has been. Maybe they have had horrible experiences. They've traveled through the desert. They've been robbed. They've been attacked. And now they've arrived here in your community. And what are you going to do? Are you going to help them out? Or are you going to just add on to their degradation? Or is there something else about it? Is it the idea that when we were living in Goshen, right, when the 12 tribes first traveled down to Egypt, they were ghettoized. Maybe it was a nice ghetto, right? There's midrashim that tell us that Goshen was like the most arable land, and their animals had plenty to eat, and they were able to get large and prosperous. Okay, fine, but we weren't welcomed into society. Now, maybe if we had been, there wouldn't be a Jewish people today. Maybe we needed to remain separate. That's a separate conversation. But it seems like there might have been some segregation going on as well. I don't know. Is that compelling to anyone, or we're okay? I think Stephen's interpretation is closer to the Pshat interpretation.
I don't know that it needs to be such a huge oppression that we're experiencing. I mean, I don't know. The more I look at it, the more I'm reading it like anyone who was other, right? Like, you've been other, you know what it's like to be other. And it might not just be like because the Pharaoh, made me build cities, but maybe it's just like when I was walking around, I was seen as, oh yeah, you're one of those.
Mm-hmm. So even some, like, going back to and then Diana, I want to hear what you have to say. Going back to the Holocaust connection that Stephen made, right? Like, the earliest days of the Holocaust, for certain Jews, it was you're othered, right? Your store is labeled, your clothing is labeled, you are forbidden from integrating.
Right.
Yeah, Diana.
And it also could be like, once you become more established and ensconced and, like a major part of society, and there's this other population of Gerim, whoever they are, you might think that you're different from them, or that you're entitled to things to which they are not entitled. And these Psukim are like, you're not different from them. You are a ger too, just like them.
Yes. Fantastic. There's a beautiful, I don't even think we're going to read it together, but on page 3, there's some quotes. Please don't turn to it now. But there's some quotes from, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, exploring that idea of how our humanity is tied to, like, the way we perceive our own humanity is tied to the way we perceive the humanity of the ger. And that if we, to whatever degree we see them as lesser, it brings us down as well. And I think that's similar, Diana, to what you said reminded me of that. Jason, you're muted if you wanted to jump in. No?
Not really.
Okay. All right.
I'm just listening to what everyone has to say.
Well, thank you for joining us. Adina, yeah.
Well, no, I'm just to piggyback on Diana's first point, which is, I think that, right, this is the only one of the three that's given and Rena's point, like that's given a reason. Like we need a reason to be compassionate or be empathetic for the ger, because it must be that it's not intuitive for us, or it's not a given or natural for us to do it as it is for the orphan and the widow. Like we don't have a lot of reasons for why we're commanded to do things in the Torah. Some things are obvious, like don't kill or don't steal, but like to be compassionate, but like this is one where it's like it's telling us ki geri ezracha be'eretz Elohem, because you were once gerim in an unknown land. Like there's something there, and I feel like it's like a everlasting message for us that like, what is it about human nature? Is it human nature that we can't be compassionate to the other? Is it that the Torah needs to convince us and say it's in your DNA, because you were founded as a nation when you were othered, and now you're bonded together, and now you need to remember that you were othered so that you can be compassionate for others. Like, is it so hard for humans to do that?
I think you answered your own question.
I know, it's crazy. Like, why can't we be good?
Eliana, do you have the source sheet in front of you?
Yes.
Can you read the Hebrew of Vayikra Yud Tet?
Yes. Ke'ezrach mikem, Adonai lechem hager.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Ke'ezrach mikem, yeh lechem hager, hagar itchem, v'ahavta lo kamocha, ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, ani Adonai Elohechem.
Thank you. There's something in that phrase that I have found to be interesting. I'm curious if there's anything that stands out to anybody else from that, especially from the Hebrew reading of Vayikra Yud Tet, Leviticus 19. Yeah, Rena.
One thing that just stands out is that I am the Lord your God. Like, that's different than all the others. It's somehow like driving it home in some way.
Although that's a pattern in Perek Yud Tet. It constantly says
I would say one thing that's moderately interesting is that the Hagar, it's the ger becomes a ger just by virtue of Hagar. He's, that person is engered basically by the activity of being a ger.
Right, there's no special ceremony, no certificate you need. Like, if you can see them when you're walking around the neighborhood, that's the people that we're talking about, right? It's the people who dwell among you. This isn't like hop on a plane and go volunteer in a third world country. Like, there's someone nearby who needs some sort of love from you. Who again, presumably you're not giving that love, because the Torah is going out of its way to mention this a few times. There's still something else that stands out in this. Yeah, David.
I don't know if it's what you're thinking of, but when I see Hagar, I immediately think of Ishmael's mother, who was kicked out of her home and had to wander the desert and said, I better close my eyes so I don't see my son die of thirst.
And Rashi says that Hagar is the daughter of Paro.
Ooh.
Okay, so we have some sort a literary hint, perhaps, at Hagar, the second wife of Abraham, who is not incorporated into the Jewish faith, but lives intimately with Abraham and has a child with him, or he has a child with her, and maybe she is the prototypical ger, the person who is so close to your home, but is always considered the other, and is kicked out and oppressed. I think that's a fantastic suggestion. It's not at all what I was thinking, and I had not considered that before. Thank you, David. Yeah, Michelle.
I was just thinking that little part of Ke'ezrach mikem yiyeh lachem, like from and to. There's something like mikem from them. Is mikem is from them, right?
From you.
Mikem is from you.
I think Ke'ezrach mikem is like they shall be as a citizen from among you, mikem, from among you.
But so like it's kind of funny to be if they're already mikem, why do they have to yeh lachem? Like there's something I don't know what that means necessarily with it, but it seems to go to great lengths to identify like which group they're in.
Cool. I don't know what to do with that, but I like it. I love that we can read. By the way, this is the whole reason. This is how I do. Anytime I do text study, it's exactly like this. We take a few psukim and just rip them apart, and we're finding so many interesting things that none of us could have ever found on our own. Although I still got one more idea. If anyone else wants to share something, I'd love to hear it. Tani, yeah.
No, I'm just noticing V'ahavta lo kamocha, just how strong that is just, it goes beyond anything else. So.
What does it sound like?
V'ahavta recha kamocha.
Okay, V'ahavta lo kamocha, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. There's a famous, it's a saying. I mean, it's in the Tanakh. It's in the Torah.
This parak, actually.
It's in this parak. This is why I married a Bible teacher.
Also, I was gonna say that there's a suggestion that there's so many mitzvot in this chapter that people make like a chiastic structure with all of them, and they link the pasuk about V'ahavta recha kamocha to this pasuk. It like works like a parabola.
Right. But one of those two, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, unlike V'ahavta lo referring to the ger, who doesn't even get named, right? There's a pronoun here. Not V'ahavta hager kamocha, V'ahavta lo kamocha. The other one's famous. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, right? Now I'm blanking. Was it Hillel or Akiva who said that it's the most important?
Hillel.
Thank you.
Rabbi Akiva.
Oh, see? Okay.
Amar Rabbi Akiva. No?
Yeah.
Thank you, Shira.
Nice.
It's also karaoke time.
So like, how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Jews could quote to you the phrase V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. And how few have ever known that there's a pasuk that says V'ahavta lo lager kamocha. It's equated, as Adina said. It's perhaps a chiastic structure that creates a real equality between the two phrases. Diana.
Well, first of all, I have to give Adina props because she mentioned that it's a parabola. So not only does she know Tanakh, she knows math. So there's that. But also, like when people wonder who l'reacha is, and like it's kind of nice to think that it's all of humanity. Like clearly it's not, because it's not the ger, because the ger is low. He's like l'reacha does not include this ger. He gets his own pasuk, which is not as nice.
Right. Which again doesn't. Well, is it not as nice? It's not as nice to say. Meaning, if the whole world is your friend, right? Do you have any friends really? Right. There has to be some. There is always going to be ins and outs.
Right.
Right. And the question is, how do you treat the ins and how do you treat the outs? It's possible, as you're kind of referencing, that like, the use of the pronoun here might be a bit of a.
Well, no, I guess you could say like, even though he's clearly not reacha, you should treat him as such because it's the same phraseology.
Well, yeah, you should V'ahavta lo kamocha. Forget about the fact that there's another verse. It's a radical statement. It's a radical statement when it says love your neighbor as yourself. Love the stranger as yourself. I mean, this was the text study that I led on Shavuot this past year. We read 3 words. We read V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha and tried to understand what it really meant. It's a radical statement, and then the fact that now in this dichotomy we've created of the ger and whoever is not the ger, right? Now it's easier for us to define the ger. I don't know who's considered our re'im anymore. To treat them the same in this radical way of loving them as much as you love yourself. I think I don't have an answer. There's no I don't have anything to go from here, but I think that just pointing out that that's the language that's used. We go from, in the first pasuk, don't oppress and wrong them, right? Don't whip them and turn them into slaves, all the way up to love them like yourself. Love them to the same standard that you love your neighbors and your friends and your family. It's pretty radical. I'm going to jump, are there any other comments, thoughts, questions? arguments, disagreements? Yeah, Stephen. Oh, yeah.
I had a thought. I forgot who said it before. Is he still on? Is that Dennis on his treadmill?
Yeah, Dennis is there.
Oh, it's, I think, a natural inclination to protect yourself, to be part of a tribe, to not allow people into your tribe, to not allow people into your space, because I don't think that the dangers of letting people into your space is so unique to our time. But if you think about tribal times, you didn't want strangers coming in. You didn't know whether they were going to be thieves and rob you, kill you, and all this crazy stuff that goes on that you see in movies. Are these warnings to protect against ourselves, against our own inclinations, our on the Neanderthal pea brain of our own defenses, and saying, hey, wait a second, you know something? You're human beings, you're menches, you need to kind of work that out and go beyond that. So that was a thought that came to me.
Well, and
I would add one thing, that a lot of religion is getting us to act against our natural tendencies.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a great point.
Well,
oh.
Did I go away? I guess no one away.
Yeah, you broke up, Dennis. We heard part of what you said. You want to say it again? Okay. Maybe Dennis's treadmill launched him out onto the street.
Lucky Dennis.
I think what Stephen's raising and what Dennis was adding on to, I think is an important, and I'm not saying Stephen was arguing against what the Pasuk is saying, but it raises the thought, which is maybe this is foolish. Maybe this is setting up the Jewish people to be the ones who get run over. The ones, this was written for when the context with when these psukim fall in the story of the Israelites in the desert, they don't yet have a country, right? They're envisioning a land that they're going to be conquering and the society that they're going to build, and this is what God's instructing them to do. They haven't yet done that, right? And maybe they're in this little ideological world where we say, here's the world we're going to create. All the other places we've ever lived, they treat the strangers horribly. They're the worst. We're going to be better. We're going to create a utopia. All the Gerim are going to be treated lovely. We know what it's like to be a Ger, and we don't ever want to treat anybody else like that ever again. But maybe there's a reason why everyone's always treated the strangers like that, right? The Egyptians were afraid that the Israelites were going to rise up and take them over. There's the threat of the other has always been present. I think it's an interesting, it's a valid point, and it's a valid criticism of this approach, which is how practical and actionable is it? And there are limitations, and I think that's an important thing for all of us to note, which is like, to what degree can you really, first of all, can you love anyone else as yourself? That's one limitation that I think we all have to ponder when we're reading these psukim. How practical is that, right? The first two are easy. Don't oppress, don't wrong, that's fine. But love them, make them equals, that's hard. It's really hard or risky. Dennis, are you? No, okay. Was there a hand? Okay. I want to jump to the third page of the source sheet. If anyone's it's a source Numbers 15, and if anyone's having a hard time seeing the sources, call out. I do have a slide for this. Someone who hasn't read want to read Numbers 15 through 16?
I'll read.
Okay.
Hebrew or English?
English, please.
The rest of the congregation, there shall be one law for you and for the resident stranger. It shall be a law for all time throughout the ages. You and the stranger shall be alike before the Lord. The same ritual and the same rule shall apply to you and to the stranger who resides among you.
Can you read it again for us?
Mm-hmm. The English is very interesting.
Do you want to read the Hebrew? You can read the
No,
Hebrew.
I was just wondering if it said Geriatom, and
You're jumping into commentary.
well, no, because it called it a resident stranger. I was curious what the Hebrew was for that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Ger Toshav.
Right,
Yeah.
but I'm saying it doesn't say that in the pasuk.
Right. We are working with the limitations of a translation.
No, it's fair.
that is
It's
not
a
right.
good thing. No, it's so
Can you
great.
read it one more? Can you read it one more time for us?
Yeah. The rest of the congregation, there shall be one law for you and for the resident stranger. It shall be a law for all time throughout the ages. You and the stranger shall be alike before the Lord. The same ritual and the same rule shall apply to you and to the stranger who resides among you.
All right. What does that tell us?
So much for
Like-
freedom of religion.
Okay. Shira's saying we've got enforced halachic observance of the resident aliens. Okay. How many? Anyone read it similarly or differently than Shira?
I just thought about how the stranger needs to become a citizen of your group. I didn't see any religious, unless I overlooked something. I didn't see anything.
Well, it's a question, right? It says,
religion.
yeah, chukah achat. There should be one law, Torah achat. One ritual is how the translation defines it. One teaching. I can definitely see where I think Shira's interpretation has merit in the text. I don't think it's the only reading, but you could definitely say everyone's got to follow all the same rules. Which again, you could say maybe they have to follow the religious laws emptily, but in an empty way. But seems like it might say that everyone has to be following Jewish law. Yeah, Tani.
No, I just found it interesting that it's saying that we and the Ger are both alike before Hashem. Seemingly, we're singled out as a special nation, but here he's treating us equally, whatever that means.
Yeah. So first of all, kachem kager. You are just like the ger. I'm thinking of all of you the same. And
I mean, this comes right after.
Yeah.
I mean, it's calling out someone who's a full-fledged convert, and so I think it's only treating Jews and converts the same, and after the convert has made a full commitment. That's how I'm seeing it, at least.
Okay, so Greg, who's actually done more homework than I have, is saying he thinks that this pasuk, I've cherry picked it out of the context, whereas the earlier Gerim or the other Gerim sources on page 1 may or may not be referring to people who've converted into the community. That the Ger here is actually someone who's converted to be a part of the Israelite people, the Jewish people. Thank you, Greg. I'm going to continue with my cherry picking approach, but I think that might be a more honest approach. I want to suggest one other reading, and we are running out of time. Rena, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
I
no.
was taken by the fact that it starts with hakahal, the rest of the congregation. It's an odd start to a sentence. And
well, it's an odd start to a sentence that I took out of its context. Greg, do you want to read verse 14 for us?
Yeah, this is with the commentary from Steinzel. So if a stranger will reside with you as a full-fledged convert who has become a member of the nation, or one who is already living in your midst for your generations, and will perform a fire offering of a pleasing aroma to the Lord as you do, so he shall do. There is no difference between an Israelite from birth and a convert who has joined the nation. That's Steinsaltz's commentary, interwoven with the text.
Gotcha. Thank you, Greg. All right. So maybe this is a little different than what we were talking about otherwise. I'm still going to argue that there's the language here. First of all, I think there's something profound here, whether it's talking about a convert to Judaism or a ger who's living amongst us, which is important to remember, both for better or worse, which is that somehow this status of otherness is hard to shake, right? With this new reading that Greg has brought us, with the context of its other psukim, it's still saying ger, v'leger hagar chukat olam l'dorotechem kachem kager yihiyeh. It's saying you're going to be the same, and it's also saying that there's going to be these identities forever, or something like that. There's something about the otherness which is hard to shake, and which I think when the Torah here is saying chukah achat lachem, it doesn't say the Israelite Jewish law should be the law for the ger.
Mhm.
It says there's one law for all of you. And so whether it's talking specifically here about the born Jews and the converted Jews, or whether it's talking about the citizened or naturally citizened Israelites and their resident alien neighbors or green card holding neighbors or whoever it might be, it's saying there's one law and there's one rule, and you're equals. You're equals in the eye of God. You're equals in the eye of the law. Shira raises an interesting question. Where does the opportunity for diversity, for different opinions, for different types of practices, for different cultures to thrive? I think that's an important question. But at least in this pasuk, it's raising the possibility that, similar to the radical statement of ve'ahavta lo kamocha, here we have chukah achat lachem.
I just want to just also giving this pasuk more context. This is coming after Chet HaMeraglim, there's a whole the spies.
The sin of the spies. So
it's just like a whole I feel like Bnei Israel are not in their usual state right now. So if this is in order, if they are receiving this law in order of how the story took place, their nationhood just got shaken. So I wonder if Torah Achad is kind of like we need to get things straight again. You need to trust me when I say go into the land. We go into the land, and I don't know if that's Torah Achad, and I don't know how that plays in with the ger, but they were people within their tribe, right? Those 10 out of 12 spies were acting like maybe Gerim at a moment because they were distancing themselves from the word of God. I don't know.
Leah?
So I keep coming back to this thought keeps coming back to me that, the one who's other, who isn't like you, so you're also not like the other, right? If you were in that other's place, you would be the ger. The ger is you, right? So maybe, okay, so I don't know what the larger context is of the verses around this, so I'm going to go with you and cherry pick a little. But maybe the law that is the same throughout the ages is you accept the other and the other accepts you, and that's y'all just accept each other.
Some sort of game theory you're suggesting, right?
Everyone has suggesting some kind of game theory, yes.
Everyone has to buy into this this mutual respect in order for it to work. But I think you're right, and I think that is what the Torah is laying out in the other psukim that we brought on the first page. It's saying, Ki gerim hayitem. You are a ger. You were a ger. What are you saying that they're different than you, that they're other than you? You've been in that exact position. There's no difference between you two. You may be on your upswing and they're on their downswing. There might be a temporal difference, but there's not a permanent difference. And the better we can get at understanding that we're no different from them, the better we can treat one another and have a better and stronger society. I think that's where it's getting at. And so, Leah, I think you're right. And Adina, I think mentioning that this is coming in right after the sin of the spies, they went into Israel, they came back with a bad report. They came back saying, first of all, whoa, we thought we were going to create this Pollyannish society where all the inhabitants are going to embrace us. Maybe we'll have to kill a bunch of them, but the ones who survive, they're going to embrace us. And they go in and they say, oh, they're giants. They're never going to be able to, we can't relate to them. Their lives have nothing to do with ours, and we can't defeat them either. So we got to get out of here. Maybe there is something about the fact that they came back with that sort of pessimism about the possibility of setting up a society that included some of the local inhabitants, that then caused, that is related to these psukim coming up here saying, hey, there are going to be other people around you. And some of them might even sign up and say they want to be part of your community and part of your faith system. And you have to understand that they're going to be equals of yours. And there's no holding anything over them, and there's no hierarchies, and there's no double standards.
Although, to go on Shira's point, like, and not to be a Debbie Downer, but like, we are commanded to wipe out all of Canaan when we get there and not to cohabitate unless they follow our rules of the 7 laws of Noah and pay our taxes. And every time I teach this, it's so hard for me because I don't think that's how we live as society. Like, I believe that in like this, like that we should invite people in and we should be kind to our strangers, but it doesn't seem like that's what the Torah wants us to do in Canaan. Wah, wah.
The Torah maybe see that as a threat? Did the Torah see that as a threat to our society?
Yeah,
and
totally.
At that particular point in time, forget the game.
Right, and the law of wiping out the inhabitants of the 7 nations is a moment in time, and hopefully some of these other precepts that we've been exploring were meant to be more everlasting. I think that's the best interpretation I can.
No, but on to Stephen's point, they're not the Gerim. The Gerim, what you said, Aaron, or the Ger Toshav, they're the ones from maybe Canaan who say, oh, I do want to stick around. Like, the people who are not willing, I guess, but it's willing to live according to our umbrella, but they're not considered the Gerim. Like, they don't fit into that pasuk because that's not, I think, what the Torah would say.
Yeah. It gets messy.
It gets messy.
And applying prehistoric. Yeah.
No, this pasuk in Bamidbar, it's like, it's so interesting. It's sandwiched between the spies, and the next chapter starts, the next parsha is Korach. So it's just like our whole nationhood is like, the whole trust issue thing is like being thrown around.
I think that, well, I want to encourage you, anyone who wants to check out some of the other sources in this source sheet. There's two excerpts from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. There's an excerpt from Jonathan Haidt, and there's 2 Mishnayot. And I'm just going to close we'll just look very quickly at the first source on page 2. Babylonian Talmud, Gittin 59a. I'm just going to read it quickly, and there's a lot to be talked about in this that we're not going to get into, but I just want to raise it as one little example of how the rabbis of the Talmud interpreted and applied some of these principles, not necessarily using the verses that we learned, but the approach towards their non-Jewish neighbors. And again, this is at a time when the Jews were definitely not. The Babylonian Talmud, they were not the ruling authority. They were themselves resident aliens or citizens of a minority class. So the Mishnah says, the poor of the Gentiles may not be prevented from gathering gleanings, right? So the forgotten sheaves in the corner of the field in the interests of peace. That refers to all the sorts of charitable crops that would be left behind for people in need. So non-Jews were not prevented from accessing those. The Gemara says, our rabbis have taught we support the poor of the Gentiles along with the poor of Israel. And we visit the sick of the Gentiles along with the sick of Israel, and bury the poor of the Gentiles along with the dead of Israel. Meaning we make sure people get buried. They had separate cemeteries, I'm pretty sure, in the interests of peace. Now, the language that's used, mipnei darchei shalom, can be interpreted a lot of different ways, and there are more cynical readings of it, which would say something like, if we don't treat them well, then we're going to get hammered. So we do it out of our own self-interest. But I think the reading I'd like to end this learning on is mipnei darchei shalom, because the way of the world, the peaceful way of the world, is that we treat all people alike, and we take care of the needy wherever they come from, whether they're from our community or from a different community. These are specific halachic requirements, and I'm not sure if those rabbis would have expanded it beyond. They don't reference, as far as I know, ve'ahavta lo kamocha for the ger. But I'd love to send us out into, and if anyone has closing remarks on, we can step out of the Beit Midrash of yore and think about modern day for a few minutes if anyone wants to share. I think it's not, I don't need to hit anyone over the head with a hammer saying that there's all sorts of strangers in our midst, whether they're living in White Plains, living in other parts of the country, who are experiencing oppression, are experiencing wrongdoing from all sorts of places and all sorts of strangers. And the definition of, we spent a lot of time talking about who the ger of the Bible was, but who would qualify as a ger today in American society, in our lives? We could talk for another couple hours about all the different possibilities and ways we can interpret that. And I think the admonition I'd like to send us all home with, or to stay home with, is ve'ahavta lo kamocha. As much as we try to think about ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, as impossible as it is to actually do that, we should grapple similarly with ve'ahavta l'ger kamocha, ve'ahavta lo kamocha. And maybe even to add a little silver lining to the ve'ahavta lo, right? Maybe it says lo instead of lager, because there's some sort of othering with continuing to use the term ger. We know we're talking about the other in that context, but saying love him like yourself, love her like yourself, love your neighbor, love your friend, love the stranger, love them all like yourselves. Yeah, Rena.
Okay, first of all, I just want to thank you, Aaron. This was wonderful. Really, thank you. And I just wanted to, there was one thought I had about this, which is in the age of coronavirus, where the notion of us versus other has really, like, I don't know, magnified, so that we're all in our own homes and our family members are now others. Our parents, our children are now others if they're not in our home. I think it really brings home this message of we're all alike. And, I think that what you brought to us really really resonated for me in that way.
Thank you, Rena.
Aaron, thank you so much. This was lovely.
My pleasure. Thank you all for joining me. It
Thank you.
would not have been anything without all of you.
Thank you.